She waited her whole life to hear someone call her mom. And when it finally happened, she didn't just give birth to one child. She gave birth to two, but in the space of a single night. Between life and death, joy and loss collided in a way she could never have imagined. Because while her babies took their first breath, she lost both her legs trying to survive. And just when she thought the worst was over, the man she had spent nearly 20 years loving looked at her, let out a quiet, unbelievable laugh, and walked away. No explanation, no comfort, no goodbye. Just like that, he left her with two newborns, a body she didn't recognize, and a life she would have to rebuild from nothing. But what happened in the months that followed is a story about strength, about identity, and about discovering your worth when everything you thought defined you is taken away. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Monica Hayes lived in a quiet suburb just outside Columbus, Ohio, where the days moved slowly and predictably, and life rarely surprised anyone in ways that truly changed them. At 43, Monica had settled into a rhythm that looked stable on the outside, but inside carried the quiet weight of unfulfilled dreams. For years, she had learned how to make peace with the idea that motherhood might never be hers, that some chapters simply close before they ever begin. And instead of fighting that reality, she adjusted to it, reshaped her expectations, and poured herself into the life she already had, her home, her work, and her marriage to Victor Hayes, a man who had been by her side for nearly 2 decades, yet somehow felt further away than ever. Victor wasn't cruel in obvious ways, and that's what made everything more complicated. He didn't raise his voice, didn't create chaos, didn't leave visible scars. But there was a quiet absence in him, a distance that grew over time until it became impossible to ignore. Conversations between them became shorter, more functional. Laughter faded into silence, and affection slowly disappeared, replaced by routine and obligation. Still, Monica stayed, convincing herself that this was what long-term love looked like, that stability mattered more than passion, and that maybe, just maybe, things would eventually find their way back to what they once were. And then, on an ordinary afternoon that felt like any other, everything shifted. When the doctor told her she was pregnant, Monica didn't react right away. The words seemed too heavy, too impossible to process in a single moment. Pregnant. At 43. It didn't feel real. But before she could even begin to understand it, the doctor smiled gently and added something that changed everything all over again. And it's twins. In that instant, something deep inside Monica that had been quiet for years came rushing back to life. It wasn't just happiness. It was something deeper, something that felt like a second chance she never thought she would get. Her hands trembled as tears filled her eyes, because suddenly, everything she thought she had lost forever was standing right in front of her again. And for the first time in years, Monica allowed herself to hope. That night, she sat across from Victor at the dinner table, her heart racing with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. This was the kind of moment that changes everything, the kind of news that should bring two people closer together. She told him slowly, carefully, watching his face as she spoke, waiting for a reaction that would match the weight of what she had just shared. But instead of joy, instead of surprise, instead of even the smallest hint of warmth, Victor simply stared at her, his expression unreadable, distant. At our age, he finally said, his voice flat, almost irritated. And just like that, the moment cracked. From that day forward, Monica began to notice what she had spent years trying to ignore. Victor grew colder, more withdrawn, more disconnected from everything happening around them. He stayed out later, spoke less, avoided anything related to the pregnancy. And whenever Monica tried to share her excitement, the name she had started thinking about, the small baby clothes she found herself holding just a little too long, he responded with silence or indifference. And if you've ever been in a moment where your joy isn't shared by the one person you hoped would understand it most, then you already know how heavy that silence can feel. Meanwhile, Monica's pregnancy demanded everything from her. Carrying twins at her age came with serious risks, and the doctors made that clear at every appointment. Her body struggled, her energy faded, and each day became a test of endurance she hadn't prepared for. But through it all, She held on to one simple belief, that it would be worth it. That every moment of discomfort, every warning, every sleepless night would fade away the moment she held her children in her arms. What she didn't know was how much it would cost her. The night everything changed didn't arrive with warning or preparation. It came suddenly, violently, in a way that left no time for understanding. One moment, Monica was resting at home, trying to manage the exhaustion that had become part of her daily life. And the next, she was overwhelmed by a sharp, unbearable pain that seemed to take over her entire body. It wasn't gradual. It wasn't manageable. It was immediate and terrifying, the kind of pain that doesn't ask for permission. It takes control. Within minutes, she was rushed to the hospital, her world collapsing into flashing lights, urgent voices, and a fear that wrapped tightly around her chest. Everything moved too fast. Doctors surrounded her, speaking in tones she couldn't fully process. Machines filled the room with sound, each beep louder than the last. Someone kept telling her to stay awake, to keep breathing, to hold on, but her body was already slipping beyond her control. And in the middle of all that chaos, Monica wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about her babies, holding on to one desperate hope that they would survive. And then, everything went dark. When Monica opened her eyes again, the silence felt almost unnatural. After all the noise, all the urgency, all the fear, there was nothing but stillness. For a moment, she didn't move, didn't think, didn't even fully breathe. She just lay there, suspended between what had happened and what she hadn't yet understood. And then slowly, carefully, she turned her head and saw them. Two tiny babies, wrapped in soft blankets, sleeping peacefully beside her. Her children, a boy and a girl. And in that moment, everything else disappeared. The pain, the confusion, the fear, it all faded beneath the overwhelming wave of emotion that filled her chest. Tears rolled down her face as she whispered softly, almost afraid to believe it was real, "They're mine." And when the nurse nodded, smiling gently, Monica felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Complete, undeniable joy. But life has a way of placing joy and heartbreak side by side. Because when Monica tried to move, even slightly, she felt it immediately. Something was wrong. Her body didn't respond the way she expected. There was a strange emptiness, a disconnect she couldn't explain. And when her eyes slowly moved downward, everything inside her stopped. Her legs were gone. Just like that. No warning. No goodbye. No time to prepare. A doctor later explained that there had been severe complications during delivery. Complications so critical that they were forced to make a life-saving decision within seconds. It was the only way to save her. The only way to ensure her children would grow up with a mother. But understanding the reason didn't make the reality easier to accept. Because how do you process gaining everything you ever wanted while losing a part of yourself at the exact same time? And just when she thought the weight of that moment couldn't get any heavier, Victor walked into the room. For a brief second, relief washed over her. Because no matter how distant he had been, no matter how disconnected things felt between them, he was still her husband. Still the one person she believed would stand beside her when everything else fell apart. But the moment he saw her, something in his expression shifted. He looked at her, then at the empty space beneath the blanket. And instead of stepping forward, he stepped back. Then came a sound that didn't belong in that room. A quiet, disbelieving laugh. "You're serious?" he said. Monica's voice barely came out. "I almost died." But Victor shook his head, already distancing himself, already pulling away from a reality he didn't want to face. "I can't do this," he said flatly. "This isn't the life I signed up for." And just like that, he turned around and walked out. No hesitation, no second thought, no looking back, leaving her alone, with two newborn babies, and a life she no longer recognized. If you've ever had a moment in your life where everything you depended on disappeared overnight, then you understand what came next, because the hardest battles are often the quiet ones, the ones no one sees, the ones that don't make noise, the ones that unfold slowly in the dark. For Monica, the days that followed weren't defined by dramatic moments, but by silence. Heavy, suffocating silence that filled the spaces where her old life used to exist. The nights were the hardest. When the hospital lights dimmed and the world outside grew quiet, Monica was left alone with her thoughts, her fears, and a reality she didn't choose. She would lie awake, listening to the soft breathing of her babies beside her, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over her in ways she had never experienced before. There were moments she cried, quietly, carefully, so no one would hear. Not because she was weak, but because she didn't know how to be strong yet. But something changed. Not all at once. Not in a dramatic, life-altering moment. But slowly, quietly, over time. She started with the smallest things. Learning how to sit up again. How to balance without falling. How to hold both of her babies at once without feeling like she might lose control. Every small victory felt enormous, not because it was easy, but because it wasn't. And with every step forward, something inside her began to grow. Strength. Not the kind people applaud, but the kind that rebuilds you piece by piece when no one is watching. Months passed, and in the middle of all that rebuilding, Monica found something she didn't expect, herself. Not the version of herself she used to be, not the woman defined by what she had lost, but someone new, someone stronger, someone who understood her worth in a way she never had before. She began sharing her story, not because she wanted attention, but because she needed connection. And people listened. Women who had faced loss, mothers who had struggled, strangers who saw something in her that she was still learning to see in herself. And from that connection came purpose, a small business, a growing community, a life that felt full, not because it was easy, but because it was hers. And then one afternoon, there was a knock at her door. Monica wheeled herself forward, steady, calm, no longer waiting for anyone to define her value. She opened the door, and there he was, Victor, looking smaller than she remembered. "I made a mistake," he said quietly. "I want to come back." Monica looked at him, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with clarity, because she finally understood something she had spent years searching for, that losing everything had shown her exactly who she was. She took a slow breath and said softly, "I lost my legs that day." She paused. "But I also lost the only thing that was holding me back." And then she closed the door, not as someone who had been abandoned, but as someone who had rebuilt herself. So if you're watching this, and you feel like life has taken something from you, I want you to understand this. Sometimes what leaves your life is exactly what was keeping you from becoming who you were meant to be. And the people who walk away when you're at your lowest should never be the ones waiting at your door when you rise. If Monica's story meant something to you, if it made you feel, reflect, or even see your own life a little differently, go ahead and hit that like button. And if you believe in stories about strength, resilience, and real-life transformation, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because the next story might be the one you didn't know you needed to hear. Thanks for listening.